The California Science Review Panel has decided to allow scientists to do a study on MDMA and what it could potentially do to help those who are born with autism. So this is really fascinating because MDMA is scheduled as a Schedule 1 drug, or is listed as a Schedule 1 drug in the U.S., which means that it has has no medicinal value.
Is this ecstasy?
This is ecstasy,
okay,
yes. It's the active ingredient in ecstasy.
I pretended like I didn't know.
Yeah.
Good one.
So the researchers think that there might be some benefits to MDMA for those who have autism. The only thing about this that troubles me a little bit is they need to get permission from the DEA. So they got permission from authorities from California, but now they have to go to a federal level. They need to get permission from the DEA, and based on past situations, it's unlikely that they'll be able to do it.
Ecstasy was developed at a little place called the University of Virginia, and
Wasn't it developed in Germany by Merck?
No, it was. It was the science behind it was by the psychology department at the University of Virginia for the purposes of getting people. First of all, it was for, I think this I may be wrong about, something to do with rehabilitating prisoners at some point, and sort of re-socializing people. But it was a drug about socializing. It was a drug about getting people out of their shell, and it probably had many more applications that I don't know. So it was originally developed for this, and I think failed. I think in tests at that time anyway, for whatever its applications were, it failed. So I guess they're trying to bring it back up and see if there's any usefulness for this. So is this more about whether the DEA should be involved in it, or
So you said the DEA is unlikely to grant the approval. Why is that?
So back in 2011, there was a researcher, I believe in Massachusetts, who wanted to do studies on the medicinal value of marijuana. And if you are a scientist, if you are a researcher, you have to get approval from the DEA, and you also have to get approval from the FDA, because there's a very specific place where you can get that marijuana. And this particular researcher didn't want to have to go through, leaps and bounds to get that marijuana from that particular farm. He wanted to be able to grow it himself. And this is, a credentialed researcher. He's not some stoner on the corner of Hollywood and whatever, just trying to get stoned.
He just go to Jesus's house and get it. And
You're terrible. You're terrible. He's trying to figure out whether or not there is medicinal value, which I think at this point we know that there is. And since it's a Schedule 1 drug, you have to get certain approval from the feds. Well, the DEA stopped on it. The DEA refused to give him the rights to grow the marijuana for his own research. So that's definitely problematic, because keep in mind the DEA actually has an incentive to make sure that researchers don't continue to study these drugs for their medicinal value. Because if it turns out that it's not a Schedule 1 drug, if it turns out that you can use this for medicine, then all of a sudden the DEA loses some of its work. They can't enforce laws against marijuana, or in this case, MDMA.
We've been saying DEA, and I said DEA, but this strikes me as that's mostly a FDA decision, wouldn't it be?
The FDA is also involved, but the DEA also plays a role, which I find very questionable, because the DEA is just supposed to be there to enforce our drug laws.
Well, maybe because it has to do with the people that they get it from, and the DEA is maybe charged with that, with regulating who it is that's allowed to.
You would imagine that the FDA would that the scientists at the FDA would make the decision on whether to go ahead with the research.
But the federal government maintains that there is no medical benefit to marijuana, right?
And they maintain that for their own motives and their own incentives.
Well, of course, but I'm saying that's why you would be stymied by the FDA, so you go the DEA route.
Right. I just would imagine that the FDA would make that decision, and then the DEA would enforce the regulations relating to that decision.
For the NBA.
Right, exactly, yeah.